Thanks, Vijay. Hey, Diksha, thanks for the invitation here. So, I'm actually outside here in a cafe. There might be some background noises. I hope that's fine. So, one of the good things or the silver linings of the pandemic here has been the fact that we can be in a much more distributed space, geographically otherwise, which has been a huge democratizing force in itself. At the same time, tied to how the topic is also day to day, it's talking about, let's say, inclusion and entrepreneurship as a key to innovation. So, just to talk a bit about the background and the context, I started out as an entrepreneur myself. I ended up doing a startup right after college. Most of my co-founders and people who are part of my team were my batchmates, were my juniors. In fact, some of the co-founders were still in college when we started the first company. So, entrepreneurship or the whole world of startups has really, played a huge role in sort of shaping uh, my life and career. And that's been the way. That's mostly been the story that I'd love to share today, and some of the learnings along the way. Um, So I'm sure that a country like India, and me included, most of us will be coming from a typical middle class background families, where almost entirely our aspirations are around uh, getting a good job, getting good education, holding down a job and stuff like that. So the world of entrepreneurship or the world of, let's say, startups is not something that is first nature to us. It's not something easily accessible, right? And this access to information, access to exposure, is what we're realizing is has always been, at least in our case, that was the case, and we went on to create something called Startup Village to say that hey, if you actually create an initiative that brings in a lot more exposure and access to technology to a lot more youngsters in the state, you would see a lot more people coming forward. And that's been the basic premise of this thesis. So, and how has entrepreneurship or startups been to me? Um, there has always been a lot of, let's say, glorification around everything startups and entrepreneurship. But I would probably like to share my perspective saying that um, it's essentially a different lifestyle. And from that standpoint, it's several years of work and probably a few moments of glory every now and then. You tend to hear about, let's say, entrepreneurial stories. So the great thing that is happening right now is there's a lot more celebration of entrepreneurship. Today we have Nika going IPO, one of the first female-led unicorns going for IPO happening today. We have Paytm going IPO, sorry, Policy Bazaar going IPO in a few days' time. Paytm after Zomato went IPO. So, and generally some of the founders who have been the driving force behind these organizations have sort of become either poster childs for the next generation as an inspiration. But this is also shifting a very cultural shift, right? So before we go to the cultural shift part of it, from my story, so one of my biggest personal journey transformations has been taking on the world of entrepreneurship. It essentially changed the way I looked at a lot of things, right from, let's say, how do you build relationships, how do you get things done, how do you build teams, how do you from execution. So personally, it's been a heavily transformative experience for me getting into the bandwagon of entrepreneurship. But most critically, um, it's a kind of networks that we could get into. In other words, we'd say, let's say, social mobility is one of the keywords that people use. Social mobility is a very, very useful, productive tool for your life outcomes in general. And the world of entrepreneurship, especially tech entrepreneurship, a lot of cultural aspects around how the way the world is organized is there is a lot of respect or a lot of um, talk about wanting to contribute and sharing knowledge. And this makes it increasingly possible for you to um, build organized companies as well. So one of the biggest phenomenons in the startup world, and that's why we also have been a beneficiary of that, is angel investors. And the ideal angel investor are founders, entrepreneurs who have been there and done that, who have made money or made exits from the kind of companies that they have built. And now, yes, they also want to invest and back in you with money, but more than the money, they also want to back people who will create new products and solutions. So, this whole world of entrepreneurship, I think, is a fantastic opportunity for India as a country as a whole, right? There is a lot of keyword in talk about innovation, and if I were to talk a bit of my own inexperience or my own biases or blockers, we ended up setting up something called Startup Village, which was a technology business incubator. Now we were a bunch of very young people wanting to bring a lot more youngsters into entrepreneurship. But if I have to be honest in the room, the whole world of incubation, the keyword incubation, that keyword I did not really understand it enough from a technical standpoint. Uh, but we went. It's more like we went back to first principles, and fortunately for us, a lot of things worked. I would say the same thing about, let's say, the keyword innovation as well. Um, Innovation as a keyword is a very powerful one, but also probably one of the most used, misunderstood one as well, right? Um, for me, it translates to different ways of getting things done. And for me, it not just applies to products and services; it also applies to way we even organize work. And a lot of the products and services, or a lot of the ways in which you see these organizations function, is essentially the unbundling of services, so to speak. Um, One of the biggest forces that has been transformative on the, let's say, the corporate world per se, it's a bring your own device sort of movement. There was a time in which, to think of me bringing my own laptop or my own mobile device for that matter, integrating to the networks of the companies that I work with was unthinkable. There was citing instance of security and everything. There was a time I used to spend briefly in consulting organizations as well in the corporate sector. There, my biggest challenge always was to locate what do you call it, a LAN cable. That was the most prized possession. Big wars used to be for that. We had to find the IT department. But currently, the bring your own device as a movement, as a policy, I think almost every organization has sort of adopted and taken it as their basically operating, and it makes sense also, right? It's a far more productive way for an employee or a teammate to function. Uh, Currently, what is happening is it's actually um, as it is, there was an increasing force towards or movement towards the workplace also being unbundled. Co-working space are coming in. People are increasingly, spending more and more time in commuting to office spaces. So we could see early signs of this unbundling happening, where offices were sort of getting, distributed, and there were some of the companies were sort of doing some trailblazing work also there. One of the companies I have read up a lot and admire a lot is Automatic, the parent company of WordPress. They have an entirely distributed policy even before, way before the pandemic. They genuinely believed in that as a future of work. Now, this whole pandemic and COVID situation has been very challenging for a lot of people. Certain communities have been, at the receiving end a lot. But what the pandemic also has given us is an opportunity, or rather forced us to rethink some of the ways in which we've always done work and social life. Right. So, IT companies who always used to co-locate services out of want of security had to figure out a way to provide the same level of security in a distributed manner in people's homes as well when the employees are working there. So if you bring to the keyword of inclusion, there's entrepreneurial energy in terms of figuring this out, but if you bring the keyword of inclusion, um, this whole pandemic has been a very, very big democratization force in that some of the norms around, let's say, physical proximity, all those things are upended. Now, it doesn't really differentiate, or it doesn't really disadvantage you to be in a very different geography. It does not really disadvantage you, irrespective kind of person. A lot of reports are also coming in that women have been, this whole shift to digitization has been a very advantageous force for women as well. I do recall reading some early reports saying that there are a lot more instances of the glass ceiling being broken now that the work organization has shifted to a more digital manner. There has been a lot of impetus in terms of, let's say, wanting to figure out or measure performance as against measuring presence. Right? There is a lot more conversation, conscious effort in terms of allowing people to figure out their own lives and optimal productivity cycles. And today we have a situation where even organizations are at the forefront of declaring that, hey, we want to embrace this as a new reality of working, right? Because some of the advantages that I see, there are still challenges. The other day, I also saw Vijay Sharma, the Paytm CEO, during his IPO call with one of the newspapers announcing that they are going to embrace reality and they don't foresee a reality of people coming to office full time anymore. They're not going to force anyone as well. And this, one of the beautiful things about, let's say, the internet or the tech startup sector, the entrepreneurship space, and always has been the opportunity for wealth creation. Um, Good thing technology, that's been always a hallmark of entrepreneurship. And earlier, this was tied to what do you call it? A very, very specific access to capital. Um, Today, what has shifted is that this whole cycle has shifted towards intellectual property, and with it's been more democratized. So anybody on the back of an idea can really take advantage of this particular force and move forward. So the digital age offers a lot more avenues for entrepreneurship, a lot more avenues for, let's say, distributed growth and wealth creation, but a lot more avenues for also equitable growth as well. It is far more easier for us to include diverse voices into this whole phenomenon, as against the reality of physically being organized. But how, if we look at the topic of how do we bring a lot more people into entrepreneurship, and I'm sure that a lot of organizations have tried various models. Um, the top corporates these days, they actually want a lot more entrepreneurial energy. A lot. Keyword is to reduce the cost of experimentation. So, increasingly, so how do so I hope I'm back.
Yeah, there's a light lag on your side, Sijo, in your network. In fact.
My audible now?
Yeah, it's a little choppy. That's all. You are audible. Yeah, much better.
Hello.
Please go ahead. Yes. Yes, Sijo, we can hear you.
Yes, looks like I'm back.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes.
Good. Yeah. So how do we bring in a lot more people into entrepreneurship? So from our experience, it's essentially related to reducing the cost of experimentation. So early in during our startup village days, when we wanted to get a lot more youngsters in entrepreneurship, what we used to do was we used to keep these open technology playground sort of spaces, and we used to bring in a lot of these devices, Microsoft Kinects of the world, everything and everything we could, anything and everything we could get a hands on, to sort of make it easier for people to try around and play around with these things. Because only after we get into a state of play that we iterate into a state of innovation or entrepreneurship, or let's say innovating on top of that. So our keyword in Startup Village used to be build, break, innovate. So unless you sort of are given the freedom and liberty to break a few things, it's very difficult to get into the mode of, let's say, building something or innovating something. So how do you reduce the cost of experimentation is almost always the way, and there are a lot of research that supports this particular theory as well. The unsaid part, or the not enough spoken part, there is one part which is tied to having access to, let's say, infrastructure, devices, tools, technology, and access. But the unsaid part of bringing down the cost of experimentation is actually bringing down the social cost of experimentation. In the earlier model of entrepreneurship, where it was tied to capital and loan and everything, um, the downsides of entrepreneurship was a lot more visible, because you actually incurred a loan or a debt which you had to service. These days, from an economic cost, it has gone down a lot, primarily because of the fact that you don't really invest a lot of capital. There's a lot of private capital available by angel investors and other organizations. Predominantly, you are only looking at an opportunity cost, which is that is only economic cost that you incur. Now, even in such a scenario, if you look at even an opportunity cost, um, it also is not going to be super costly for an entrepreneur or the founding team, because the technology that and skill that you pick up in the entrepreneurial journey is typically very valued by the industry. So almost always, or in at least in majority of cases, provided you've had a good run and a good set of mentors or a board and everything, advisory board and all, and provided you have created value for someone, um, almost in all cases you land yourself either an acquire sort of an opportunity where you go on to continue the journey with a different organization, particular space, not specifically in the same product sometimes, and that's also been a very very good continuity that is happening. But the social cost of entrepreneurship, or the social cost of failure, that still exists. But here again, it's very different, because it's more in terms of people accepting or people being comfortable talking about their ideas, and your ideas sometimes fail. Uh, Built into innovation or trying things is the fact that a lot of things will not potentially work. In such a scenario, how do you get comfortable with these cycles as a person? How do you manage your emotional energy? Uh, with the highs comes the lows. How do you manage relationships? All these social costs of entrepreneurship, if you bring down, increasingly you'll start seeing a lot more people being attracted in a particular space. We've had countless experience of this working amazingly well for us. Um, my best reference as an example, or as a mental model, is a university library. A well-functioning university library is a very welcoming place for you to be. You want to spend time there. You'll probably pick up a conversation with someone that you meet there. You'll probably end up watching a few documentaries there. Sometimes you'll read a theoretical book, but most of the time you might end up reading some fun books, fiction, comics, and everything. But essentially, this is a place that attracts talent and people, and you actually want to spend time there. You want to indulge in ideas. You'll meet your counterparts. Uh, how do you create such a fluid, informal, free thinking environment is a challenge that almost every organization individual has in terms of creating an entrepreneurial culture. Yes, you want challenging problems, you need intellectual mentoring, but the emotional comfort that is required for us to try things out, that goes at the heart of some of these initiatives. Um, these are some of my early thoughts. As a country, as a market, we have seen tremendous growth or tremendous transformation in the last 15 years. So much so that we could even say that we have seen the first stage of growth of the Indian startup ecosystem. Um, the Zomatos and the Paytms of the world, almost all of them, the Flipkarts, are almost all of them were created in the 2005 to 2010 sort of a time frame. In the first cycle of 10 to 12 or 10 to 15 years, 12 to 15 years, around the completion of that, we are seeing some of these companies, becoming very big, going global, even some of them, like the Freshworks and everything. And we as a country is standing, very, very poised uh, for the next stage of growth. If I were to, close it on a positive note, there has been no better time to start up or explore entrepreneurship at this point in time. Uh, the country as a whole is a lot more welcoming. Almost every state government out there has interest in entrepreneurship or startups as part of the core mandate. If I speak about Kerala, I think last time we come from the state of Kerala, so that's why I can cite that example a lot more comfortably. One of the people, actually one of the media journalists, had reached out saying that's the first time in the recent Kerala election that every party, as part of the political manifesto, had entrepreneurships and startups as a key mandate and focus area for them. If you look at the zeitgeist and the aspiration of how things have changed, um, it's not just acceptable that people pursue entrepreneurship. It's also even I would probably say encouraged to pick up entrepreneurship, even if you know general society. But more critically, if you look from an aspiration of the next generation of youngsters, uh, there definitely is a shift towards entrepreneurship. Some of the role models have changed. And this, I think, is a fantastic opportunity for the country and all of us together. How do we actually invest in the next pipeline of entrepreneurs, of, let's say, young minds getting into entrepreneurship? How do we make sure that we encourage them, attract them, and nourish them and nurture them? I think that is a beautiful opportunity, and that's also the challenge that is thrown open in front of all of us. And this movement is going to be a lot more distributed in the country this time around. Because even if you look at some of these founders of these companies we're talking about, almost all of them have come from smaller towns from various parts of the country. Right? They might have moved to some of the big cities, but they continue to inspire uh, every youngster from the neighborhoods that they came from. Right? Language plays a role, and in a country like India, what has also happened is the fact that with public goods like UPI, public distributed UPI, and thanks to Geo and Reliance, we have massive internet access and digital access. I think the per capita cost of a GB of the per unit cost of a GB of data is the lowest in the world. We have a large amount of people connected to the internet thanks to some of these cheapest data rates and everything. And this is going to be a market that's going to see phenomenal inclusion and growth to the point where the kind of models that we adopt in India will go on to become and define some of the standards in which the 21st century digital first world is probably going to be organized, at least in emerging markets for sure, but perhaps even in developed markets as well. And that is the opportunity and the ground reality right now. So super excited about the prospects that the sector holds for us. Extremely bullish on the next generation of entrepreneurs bringing out more digital first and India first product opportunity, and extremely bullish on the ambition and the aspiration of the people from India, not just the present crop of founders, but the ones that are going to come up as well, to actually become some of the best in the world. So today, in terms of absolute numbers, India is nearing the second place in terms of the number of unicorns that any country has. US comes first, China comes second, India comes third, and we are getting very close to overtaking China in terms of absolute number of unicorns. And almost all these people currently are dreaming of setting their sights in terms of getting into some of the most respected global brands out there. We will know whether we'll come good in that in the next 10, 15 years. Freshers now want to take on Salesforce. We'll see a lot more founders want to take on the world and build global brands out there. Paytm wants to break into the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 100, so to speak, and to become a most valued banking brand in the entire world. I mean, entire Asia, if not the entire world. So this is a stage of ambition, and we'll know whether we'll get there in the next 15 years or no. But there is no taking away from the fact that uh, ambition clearly points in a particular direction, and none of us are going to stop short of keeping making progress in a particular direction and taking us to uh, taking India to being one of the best startup groups in the world. Almost all these first generation founders have started becoming angel investors to help the next generation of founders to come up and create and craft more amazing businesses, far better businesses that they themselves have built. And this cycle, this flywheel is set in motion. And the next 15 years or the next 20 years or even the next 30 years, I would probably say is when we will be able to take advantage or really build on the amazing foundation that we have been able to build right now. Back in 2005, at the time when we started, the startup sector was mostly startups were mostly a promise and potential. But cut to 2021, 2020, what we have right now is recognition and visible data of startups genuinely being an asset class. COVID also has accelerated in such a way that the world needs a lot more new products and services, different ways of living, different ways of thinking in terms of organizing life and work, and that is going to be major accelerating force towards entrepreneurship and innovation. My appeal and wish to the entire audience is it's again the same thing. There's no better time to start up right now. It's a fascinating journey. It's a very addictive journey. It's a different journey. But if you have been itching to try it out, if you have been harboring aspirations towards exploring your entrepreneurial side to yourself, I think there is no better time than right now for you to step out and explore and make good out of it. Wishing you the very best in case anybody decides to take that particular course and route. And thanks again for this forum and invitation.